Grounding meditation. So Deborah Driscoll, take it away. Yes.
Thank you, Eduardo. Welcome everybody to today's Fearless Chat. So the way we're going to begin is just with a little bit of a moment to connect to breath, to connect to self, and connect to each other. So I'm coming today from the beautiful island of Barbados, and I know that we're across the United States, and I know that we're down in Australia, and there may be other places that I don't know. So today we're just going to connect to our breath with where we are, and then we're going to connect to each other. So my first invitation to you is get as comfortable as can be. So you might want to shift a leg, your hips, your neck, your shoulder. Just take a moment to check in with your physical body, because sometimes we can get driven by the mind and busy and forget that our body is holding us. So just check in with yourself in this little moment. You might be waking up in Australia, or it's the end of your work day in the Northern Hemisphere. And then if it's available to you, take the time to close your eyes. Release yourself from the Zoom screen and just stay connected to my voice and to your breath. So just tuning in with your breath, your constant companion, forever working for you, with bringing fresh air and oxygen into the body, into the mind, and allowing the release.
Bye, have a good one. See you tomorrow.
Just take this moment to connect with that breath and acknowledge that without even trying, without maybe sometimes even noticing, that breath has been with you and has been supporting you. Our breath has the ability to bring us into the present moment, and our breath also has the ability to anchor us. So now what I'm going to invite you to do is to send the intention of your breath deep down into your belly. And just notice the difference when the breath goes into the belly, and just feeling yourself anchoring that little bit more. And now, with your amazing imagination, you're going to imagine that your breath goes further than your belly. It goes all the way down to the soles of your feet. So allow your breath and your imagination, and through your mind's eye, the grounding of your breath as it goes all the way down to the soles of your feet. And continuing with breath, continuing with this amazing imagination and mind's eye that you have, you're now going to imagine with your breath that out of your feet, there's roots growing down through the floor, into the earth, and further anchoring and grounding you down. Allow yourself to sink into the feeling of being completely grounded by just focusing on your breath. And now those roots that are down into the earth are going to stretch, and they're going to grow, and they're going to reach from where you are, out of your home, across your neighborhood, across your city. And all of the roots on this call are going to stretch from Barbados to the United States, to Australia, and to any other corners of the globe that are connected with us now. So just breathing into that, I am connected, I am grounded, I am in this moment breathing with this community, and we are connected. I belong here. I am supported here. Just take one final big deep breath into all of those roots, connecting all of us across the globe. and just take into your heart how that feels. You are connected, you belong here, and we are so happy that you are here. Welcome to today's Fearless Chat.
Thank you so much for that, Deborah. Elevated sparkulation. Thank you for the grounding. For those of you who are joining us for the first time in this Fearless Communicators landscape, my name is Eduardo Placer. I am the founder of Fearless Communicators. My family are Cuban immigrants. I identify as Latinx. I also identify as gay and queer. My pronouns are he, him. And this Fearless Chat journey, it's hard to believe that we're at number 40 right now, began in March as an opportunity to really build community around the questions that were most relevant of the moment. And over the course of the past 40 conversations, we've ranged in everything from what else to do besides wash our hands in the early days of the pandemic, how to pivot your business, dealing with racial justice and equity work. And then as we were pivoting into this election timeframe, we were really interested in what is the current conversation around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Has it changed? Has it evolved from where we were in May? And I could think of no better person to frame this conversation than Jennifer Brown, who is a dear friend, collaborator, and friend. And just thrilled to have you here in our company. And you're in for a fabulous conversation. There is a bit of a presentation that she's going to give. My invitation is for you to use the chat as an opportunity for me to kind of be bridge of audience, voice of audience through the conversation. And then what we're going to do is create some space at the end to really engage and ask questions directly and engage in a really meaningful conversation about what's happening and what's next. So with that, Jennifer, it is my pleasure to have you here. Take it away.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to try to do my tech here. Thanks for your patience, everybody. Let's see. Okay, so thank you, Eduardo. Thanks to everybody. And some of you were good friends. I'm so happy to see you. Some of you for the second time today because we had our community call earlier. I am Jennifer Brown. As Eduardo said, my pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm on Lenape land here in New York City. Thank you, Eduardo, for that. That's such a gift that you've given me amongst many. And I specialize in diversity, equity, and inclusion and work with companies of all sizes and organizations to build their strategy and also their learning programs and their training. And what a gift to do this work in 2020. It has been incredible. What a privilege, what a challenge in a beautiful way. What a learning curve we've all been on. So I wanted to give you a taste of the keynote that I give a lot. And I'll do it quickly, but the context, I'll try to wrap it around what's happening this year, which I think is relevant more than ever, and a connection I like to bridge because it's a very unique year. And yet a lot of these things remain true and have always been true. So we're just having this moment of, oh, okay, so now I'm understanding what the context for a lot of this. And so some of you may know my story. I came to New York to be an opera singer, performer like Eduardo. And I studied operatic vocal performance at Manhattan School of Music, and I unfortunately injured my voice. So I had to get several vocal surgeries. And you have to be completely silent for weeks after vocal surgery. And then once you're allowed to make a sound, all that comes out is a tiny high-pitched squeak. So it was heartbreaking. It was a need to reinvent. And I thought I would never smile again or be able to express myself in the world. But luckily, performers are agile people. And I followed some friends who'd reinvented. And they said, you know, you like the stage, you'd probably be a really good trainer and a facilitator. And I didn't know what that was, but I followed their advice. And I would end up getting a second master's degree in organizational change and leadership development, and going on to some HR roles, and then founding my company 13 years ago, Jennifer Brown Consulting. And today we get to work across so many different companies to help them build structures and cultures where all of us can feel welcomed, valued, respected, and heard. So I like to say I was meant to use my voice, just not as a singer. But the second way I was not using my voice is I'm a member of the LGBTQ plus community like Eduardo, and I was closeted as a performer in my 20s and 30s, thinking I would never get cast as the ingenue. If anybody knew the truth about me, right? How could I be the love interest or the young bride or whatever? And then as an entrepreneur, I was also relatively closeted as well until I became woman-owned certified and LGBTQ owned and certified as a diverse supplier, which is a point of real pride for me. So it's something that kind of enabled me and gave me a reason that was business aligned to say like, hey, you need us in your supply chain, by the way. And just a really amazing community that we've been a part of. But even to this day, I think about the ways that I don't bring my full self into the room and the energy that I still put towards that concept, right? And that reality and the sort of psychological safety struggle that I have, and I know so many of us have, whether we're LGBTQ, whether we're the only person of color in the room, lots of different diversity dimensions, both visible and invisible. And so that concept that I refer back to is the covering concept, which was coined by Kenji Yoshino and Christy Smith in some work they did with Deloitte, and it's downplaying a known stigmatized identity. So for me, being a woman in a male-dominated business world, finding myself in rooms where I'm the only apparent sort of female, and that's making a lot of assumptions, but it's what it appears to me. And then also perhaps being the only LGBTQ person, although we can't also know that for sure. So those are my identities that I think I downplay. And I think about, is this something I share? Is it going to impact my message, my credibility, my authority? And literally, I'm often in the room as the expert. And yet I'm sort of doing this double work, trying to figure out like how do I anticipate bias? How do I anticipate stereotypes? How do I neutralize things? How do I overcompensate so that, people will take me seriously, et cetera. So this is very personal for me. I also just happen to study it on an organizational level. And so there are 4 kinds of covering that they talk about in the research. And I just want to go through these really quickly and how much many of us do this on a regular basis, which is 61% of us. So at any given time, we're constantly thinking about this. Appearance-based covering, wearing our hair straightened, for example, dressing more formally. For LGBTQ people, for non-binary people, it is, picking a masculine or feminine expression because that's what's expected of us. And we don't want to deal with, if we expressed our gender in the way that we were most comfortable with, we don't want to deal with the biases and the microaggressions. Affiliation-based covering is when we distance ourselves from a stigmatized group. We don't want to be affiliated with it. And so that may be, I think it's interesting to think about the fact that parental leave is offered, and fathers in particular don't take advantage of parental leave in so many companies. And that's straight up stigma. And it happens all over the world. And the distancing from being affiliated with, I don't want to be assumed to not be committed to my career. So I'm not going to affiliate myself. I'm not going to ask for what I want and what I need as a parent, right? As maybe I want to be a stay-at-home parent, but there's no room for that. Advocacy-based covering is when we, stay quiet instead of challenging jokes and comments. So we don't want to be seen as advocating for our identity group, because we know that there's a penalty of doing that too much, of being the squeaky wheel, if you will. And so a lot of us just cease to advocate. And this is honestly where allies come in, because there's so much fatigue around advocacy, and there's so many penalties to drawing people's attention to our stigmatized identities, that this is where real allyship can make a difference and carry some of that load. And finally, association-based covering is literally like being seen to be with others that identify as we do, and the eyebrow raises and the questions that are asked. So if I'm an LGBTQ manager and I have a lot of LGBTQ people on my team, somebody might say, oh, well, she has a tendency to hire people that identify like she does, right? And so many of us feel we are very good at making the point that we're being objective, right? That we're not favoring, that we don't have a positive bias. And we sort of overcorrect on that because we know there's a penalty to association-based bias. So, and this is just fascinating to me and so painful, because it's really experienced, the covering behaviors are experienced mainly by those of us who are underrepresented. And I like the other word, underestimated, in the workplace. So the numbers are extremely high for these groups of identity. I look at this 83% for LGBTQ, and I always like to make the point that half of us, nearly half of us, are closeted in the workplace. And that was a statistic from last year. And remember, we could get fired in many states in the US before the Supreme Court ruling this past June. And so there are real penalties to bringing your full self to work. There's another group that reports covering that Deloitte writes about, and it's these guys. And so this is always a really interesting moment in my presentations. And I get to talk about so much invisible diversity. I get to talk about the fact that as I walk into rooms like this, I have my own biases about how I'm going to be received, how I'm going to be perceived, and what I'm not perceiving in them. And so it's just been such an aha moment to build a container for leaders to walk through the door and share some of the things in the thought bubbles with me. And it's just been a revelation and such a good reminder to me that everybody has a diversity story. And my job these days is to help rooms that look like this and leaders that look like this to connect into this moment that we're in 2020, which is particularly difficult when you identify in certain ways because of a lack of lived experience that allows you to relate to this moment. So I often say this group has the most learning to do and the longest journey to travel in order to be a resonant leader for these times. It's a particular challenge, right? And so then if we think about all the different aspects of diversity, we start on the left side of this chart with our inborn diversity, things that we can't change about ourselves, our innate aspects and characteristics. But then the secondary aspects are our acquired diversities. And so those are our accident of birth. What means was I born into? Was I born into a stable or safe home? Did I have enough to eat? Was I the first person to graduate from college in my family? So many things that are happen to us, but that really actually make a huge impression on us. And these are things we carry with us forever. They shape us. And yet they're not very comfortable for workplaces to get their collective heads around and to build the right sort of inclusive structures for belonging for all of these identities. But it continues. Organizational diversity exists, cultural diversity. My partner is Filipina American, first generation, Michelle. And it's fascinating to see these giant Filipino parties, like so much food, so many generations, all night, and my family is this tiny nuclear family. Like we're so small and we just make enough food just for that one meal, It's sort of that Northern European cultural identity, right? And it's fascinating to notice that and think about the layers of these identities for us. And finally, era diversity is, I think of generations. I think of millennials and Generation Z that's coming in behind them. And the fact that they are going through a lot right now, obviously, but I also am so hopeful that they're committed to all of their identities and their intersectionalities and their authenticity, and they're not going to compromise when they come into workplaces. In fact, they're going to come in and we've got to be ready for them. And I don't think we are right now. We just don't even speak their language. So it's a really interesting time. And I like to sort of make that point with leaders to say, our organizations are very behind. We're not ready. We don't even talk about our pronouns in this workplace, and people don't know what we're even talking about. And yet we have this whole generation coming in that's incredible allies to each other and also very, very deeply aware of social justice issues, et cetera. So we have a lot of work to do.
Jennifer,
yes.
I'm curious because in this conversation, because I think it's so rich, I think it was the first time that I was in interaction with you where this whole idea of like, there's what we see, but then there's all of this that we don't see, right? That actually illuminates the diversity of all of our experience. And I would just love a moment, maybe after this, for us to just kind of identify people where they are and use that in the chat, because some people may realize, wait, I didn't even consider that as a form of diversity, but something for people to understand within their own personal narrative and story where they are in that. So do you want to speak to this and then we can talk about sharing under the waterline? Because I think that
I would love that. In chat, if everybody would chat in something that We don't, when we say bring your full self to work, to life, whatever frame and container you want to think of, what are some aspects that you have traditionally, maybe as a professional, covered? What have you downplayed? So maybe it's something that is obvious about your identity, right? It's, I can't hide perhaps my gender expression. I can't hide my ethnicity, although my ethnicity could be, I could pass as white, but not be white. Certainly. So, but there's other things that we can bury deep and we can pass through the world without ever bringing them up. But then we miss out on a lot of the richness that exists in organizations that people are kind of studiously keeping below the waterline. And thanks, Laura. First generation American, people assume my family's been here for generations. Thank you. Health issues, my religion, my spirituality, my sobriety. Thank you. I actually added sober and in recovery on the bottom right here recently, because I had a friend who said she goes to AA meetings every day, but has a whole like elaborate story about something else, right? Allegedly that she tells coworkers where she has to be. Mental health is enormous, and really spiking in terms of the presentations I'm giving. Formerly incarcerated, thank you. We actually, it's not on this slide, but we just added formerly incarcerated self or family members. So thank you for sharing that in here. Disability, first college graduate, first generation American, an advocate, and person with a disability. Thank you so much for sharing these.
I love
Having an
Robin
illness.
code switching all dang day.
All dang day.
I would
Oh,
just say
yes.
all ding dong day.
Oh,
Code switching
yeah.
now, all the ding dong day.
Na, 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 na,
Oh my
na.
God. Yeah, it's like, I totally get it. Adoption status.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yes,
And I think
adoption status.
it's such a beautiful opportunity to slow down, because I think it's a great humanizing moment, and I just feel like even as people,
Mm.
we're sharing, like, I think we get a full picture of the humanity, the breadth of humanity that's in our group here, right?
Beautiful.
So yeah, so beautiful, so powerful, and that
Mm.
is, it can hide, right?
Mhm.
It's like
It can
below
hide.
the waterline, which is so powerful.
Yeah.
So thank you to
And we
everyone
can
for
hide it.
these. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think this water line kind of moves up and down depending on the safety we feel in any given situation. And it can change depending on, who's around and how we trust them, and employer to employer, manager to manager. It's constantly shifting. And I think the goal these days is to recognize all the diversity that we can't see, and then to be the brave and courageous person to lower our water lines so that it gives permission to others to do the same. And so in the organizational context, for me, this means coming out as LGBTQ, whether I'm in the mood or not, whether I'm in a room that feels safe or not. I have committed to myself that I will, because I never know who's in that room. I never know who needs to see me that day. And so when I work with leaders who look like straight white cisgender men, it's hard, sometimes harder work, but to explore what's under their waterline, and to say, when you do this and when you talk about this and when you're vulnerable to it, it sets a tone in your organization that kind of thing matters. And it may be uncomfortable. And by the way, if you're not uncomfortable, you're not leading. And so we sort of go down this road of saying, where can we go first? And I think people of relatively more safety, privilege, comfort, security, when we go first as well, like when I share my pronouns are she, her, hers. People are like, well, what are you doing? And why are you doing that? And why does it matter? And I say, well, it matters because I can share it without paying a penalty. And there's somebody else that can't. So
Jennifer,
I need to make sure I do that.
I love it's
Yes.
so powerful, and we're getting some amazing stuff in the chat too. Igor's talking about how he migrated from Venezuela 3 years ago, and from Caracas, one of the most dangerous cities in the world, and also the only gay in his family, right? And then Dave is talking about accessibility, and when people talking about accessibility, for those who are able, they're like, huh, what? It's like the blank stares. And then, Yana just shared that in her gynecological practice, she performed abortions for many years, but can't say that in certain groups, and then they also don't ask, right? So it's so powerful. I want to share briefly about the importance of pronouns, because as someone who's in the LGBTQ community, like there was a part of me that was like, well, do I really need to do that? Do you know what I mean? Like acknowledging my space of privilege as a gay cisgender man within the LGBTQ space, right? So I want to acknowledge that the thought came from my privilege, right?
Yeah.
And it was a straight cisgender man who had his pronoun designation on his email that had me say, wait a second, I'm putting that on my email. Like he created the pathway for me to see that as like a necessary
Oh.
act for myself. And everyone on Fearless Communicators has their pronoun designations on their email addresses. But what's so powerful is we had a client in Australia who has a partner who saw my email signature and had never seen the pronoun designations. And when they saw it, were able to identify themselves not as a she, her, but as a they, them. Right? So like the ripple of that choice of a straight cisgender man to put his pronoun designations, which gave me permission as a gay man to put that on my place, created the pathway for someone to see themselves halfway across the world. Right? So it's like those micro acts of allyship that I think really make such a huge difference.
That's so beautiful. Yeah. And I would say, when you diversity story tell, don't assume that your story doesn't matter or that it's irrelevant or that it's just yours, because usually there's a universality to our experiences. And so that's another thing I tell people. I almost didn't tell my story about losing my voice because I thought, who would care? You know, what relevance would it have? And I pushed myself to do it because it was such a wound for me. And it was very cathartic to tell that on the TEDx stage. And then I realized it was a metaphor. It's not, doesn't need to be literally losing my voice. It can be any time I felt voiceless, that I had been deprived of that, and how invaluable our voices are, and how I had to like fight to get mine back. And sort of as I pulled this string, it was such a rich metaphor, and it's continued to sustain me to this day. So I say, like, don't judge your story before it gets out. Like it's a seedling that needs to be encouraged. And you have absolutely no idea, like Eduardo, you're saying, the ripple effect of who needs to see that and hear that in you, in someone that looks like you too. You know, I mean, I walk on stages and come out and people are all of a sudden, they're like, wow, I was biased. I didn't even think about that about Jennifer. You know, it's such a powerful moment. So anyway, so yeah, thank you so much. And there's so much, you know, what I wish for the organizations I work with is that we all sort of collectively lower our waterline so that we create more psychological safety, and that those of us who have more stories to share would feel comfortable doing that. Because if we don't know we exist, then we can't really address all of who we are, and we can't resource and support all of who we are. If we think something doesn't exist, does it get any budget? You know, that's the problem with counting LGBTQ people with disabilities, is that, you know, it's just a very invisible community because of the fear. Even in really progressive companies, people are still extremely closeted, which is another sort of hard truth I have to share with a lot of the organizations I work with.
Mm.
Yeah. Collectively lowering our waterline. Yes. Fabulous. All right. So I want to say a thing about privilege, Eduardo. So you all might know intersectionality is popularized by Kimberly Crenshaw, who's a Black woman professor. She defines it as the intersections of gender and ethnicity, specifically Blackness. So she's a Black woman, and it really gave language to the fact that not all women are a monolith. Obviously, we don't experience the world in the same way, but believe it or not, that has been historically, we've been lumped together, right? And then we've started now to understand the pay gap is different for white women, for women of color, for Indigenous women. We have that nuance now and those facts, thank goodness. For me, I have the intersectional identities, but I also have these identities of privilege. And when I try to explain, like, how can we think about privilege differently versus weaponizing it or having it weaponized against us? Can we think of it as something we can activate around? And this was a connection I finally made as being in the LGBTQ community for over 2 decades, I assumed allies were for me, you know, that I needed male allies, that I needed straight allies. I never saw myself as the ally. And so these last couple of years, and especially because of this year, I've flipped around, and I thought, where can I have platform that I can share? Where can I tell the truth with that less penalty or no risk? Where can I challenge people that look like me? Where can I vouch for something and I will be believed just based on what I look like? And so as I work with people who consider themselves of many privileges, therefore they're sort of sitting on the sidelines of this conversation, I'm saying, no, you can actually step in and do so much. But you're also going to need to acknowledge very openly that there are lived experiences that you are not familiar with at all. And part of the beauty of vulnerable leadership communication is saying, I am learning, I am a work in progress. You are going to see me endeavoring to do this, this, and this, and very imperfectly. And I would invaluable value your feedback because I want to grow and be better. And there's things that I'm not going to know. So can you imagine working for leaders that talk like that? Like, I don't think it's very common.
Well, Jennifer, what I think is so beautiful is like what I also hear is humility, which I think is the piece of it, you know, that is so important. Like I want to acknowledge Dave Barr, who said, you don't need to be cited to witness the blank stares either. And I want to be responsible in my communication if I said something that may have, given that the only way to witness is with seeing, right? And be responsible for my communication if that landed in any way. I apologize for that. And again, it's like the ways that we can just be on the sliding scale of being better always, you know, and being more inclusive in our communication. And I love this idea of privilege and how we use our privilege and allyship. And we have a woman in our community who you also know, Robin, who talks about adjacency, you know, and I feel like as somebody who identifies as queer and also Latinx, like, you know, a lot of our work in Fearless Communicators has been around women, and I don't identify as a woman. I don't live in the body of a woman. And like, I know that our liberations are connected, right? They are adjacent liberations, right? So that we can stand adjacent to each other to collectively rise. And I think that, and I think within that, I think also within the very framework that is our LGBTQ community, I think it's understanding within that landscape where I can use the privileges that I have in that community to advocate for those who are not necessarily above the line. For example, people who identify as ace, right? They don't necessarily always, the asexual people don't necessarily present in a certain way. So naming and acknowledging them, right? Our trans siblings, our non-binary, gender non-conforming, like all of that, it's understanding that if you've gotten to the seat, you haven't reached equity, you've reached privilege, right? And there's an opportunity to see who else can come to the table, right? There's always more room at the table. Let's make more room.
Yes. So good. I love what you just said. The way I say that is just because you have one or more marginalized identities doesn't make you an inclusive leader. It doesn't mean our work is done. And, you know, we've seen the LGBTQ community, I think, Eduardo, have sexism problems, homophobia, transphobia, racism, all of it. It's almost like these diverse communities are replicating, you know, the unfairness of our world. And those are the systems we know. Those are the systems we grew up in. So what else are we going to do? You know, we build a community that reflects that unless we work incredibly hard to have an intersectional lens.
Yeah.
And so what was so wonderful was the focus on Black trans women this year at Pride. You know, that I was like, first of all, it goes back to our roots because Stonewall, where it was a riot and it was led by Black trans women.
Totally.
So let's be honest about the history of our community. But that community has been missing in so many of our agenda items and so much of our, I don't know, the people we think of when we think of the LGBTQ community as a whole. So much work to do.
Bernadette's quote, which is the Shirley Chisholm, if there's no place at the table, bring a folding chair. I'm like, yeah. I feel like Mary Poppins. Excellent. I have a folding chair in my purse and it's like practically perfect in every way. There it is at the table.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So yes. And I just want to go back. Robin made this point. Privilege is experienced, is not just white privilege. Yes, absolutely. I would argue all of us have some kind of privilege, right? If I may be POC, like maybe I'm a queer woman and I have a Ivy League education, or I am, you know, I think about that in terms of my coworkers. I might work in a company where that's something I cover. or I just don't want to bring it up because people don't like, they look challenged by that or whatever. That was my friend Stephanie's story. Like it was fascinating to think about how she can utilize all of the pieces of who we are, regardless of whether they are sourced from our marginalized identities or our privileged identities, but there's always something to do. And I think we haven't made greater progress on D&I because the most marginalized have been charged with this work. You know, when we all eyes look towards the women and the people of color and the people with disabilities and LGBTQ to sort of to fix this and also to like manage it. You know, it's outsourced almost to us. And so,
That feels
right?
so true.
And it makes
Oh
no
my God, I
sense.
felt
It
that
makes
in
no
my body. Yeah. You fix it. Okay.
No wonder we're so tired. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm going to fix this when I didn't build this system in the
Totally.
first place. The
Totally.
system doesn't work for me. And I've been shut out of all the rules of
Right.
this system. Nobody's cluing me in to how this system really works. And by the way, I don't have any positional power because of bias and all the other things to really own the problem. So these days I'm really trying to enlist like everyone that's been sitting on the sidelines to say, this change is not going to be sustainable based on all that we've been gifted with this year. We are not going to be able to build a sustainable movement and do the work we need to do to improve organizations if we don't have the participation of everyone. And I just think we've got to figure out how to get people to identify with this conversation, maybe not in the way they think. Like, oh, I'm a straight white guy. How do I possibly enter this conversation? We have to answer that question in order to move forward, I believe. All right. So I already talked about that. And then I just wanted to show my inclusive leader continuum. Eduardo, you know this model well, but it's from the second book, which is How to Be an Inclusive Leader. It's a 4-part model. We have an assessment that is, thank you very much, little book plug. We have an assessment, the Inclusive Leader Assessment, which you can find on jenniferbrownspeaks.com, and it takes 10 minutes. But I think what's important is we take the right next step. We know where we are, and we can, by the way, be at multiple places at any given time. I think about, Eduardo, your example, there's so much we need to learn about people in the LGBTQ community. But also people with disabilities, mental health, veterans experience. Like I'm always learning and I'm always in the unaware and aware categories at the same time as I may be an advocate about other identities. And so, you know, how can we show solidarity? I like the word accomplishing. And I know Misa is going to join you soon. She talks about equity broker. And I love that too. It's really rich. So it goes beyond allyship because sometimes allyship can be like, oh, I'm going to put my pin on and I'm kind of done for the day and I'm going to check the box and look at me. You're only an ally if somebody in an affected group calls you an ally. So it's a constant thing that we earn. It is not a destination. It's never finished. And it's literally all about the impact we have, not the intent. The intent can be, I'm a good person. I'm an ally. I believe in all this, you know, but to me, that doesn't matter. And intent does not shift outcomes for people. And it doesn't build better organizations that work for more of us. Okay. Let's see. So how are we doing on time, Eduardo?
So
I could just stop right here.
5:45. It's 5:45. So we were
Let's
talking
keep
a lot.
dialoguing.
Yeah.
Okay. So just going through this one by one quickly. Unaware is the first phase. I don't know there's a problem. I'm in denial that there's a problem. It's somebody else's job. I'm a good person. All that stuff can live in unaware. In aware, we wake up, we say, oh, wow, there's so much I don't know. And now I'm in sort of full on learning mode. And I think 2020 has been an aware year. Many of us have been shown many things and we've had a lot of feelings about it, right? We feel guilt, we feel shame, we feel paralyzed, we feel overwhelmed. We're not sure what to do. I mean, to me, that's very much a hallmark of aware. It's the overwhelm is real. And I like to say to people, there's other people that have been overwhelmed for a really long time. And, you know, welcome to the party. Because there's a lot that's broken. And so in aware, it is about like, you know, reading, listening, consuming media that's not by and about people that look like you. It is, you know, revisiting who you surround yourself with, your friend groups, your parenting groups, your houses of worship, your teams at work, making sure you're mentoring across difference. You're making time and intentionally seeking out those kinds of really important one-on-one relationships so that you can have more richness in your life, because we are all in these like bubbles of our own identity, and we've got to kind of very proactively break through those. So then if we get an aware, it's learning, but it's not action. So phase 3 is active. And this is the phase where a lot of people get stuck right now. It's like, okay, so I've learned a lot and I want to put this into action. And now I'm afraid to say the wrong thing. So there's a lot of experimentation, uncertainty, making mistakes, asking, apologizing, getting knocked down and trying to learn how to be better. And this is that can be paralyzing in its own way, because we are addicted to perfection, and there's nothing that is going to be perfect about this journey. We are going to get things wrong, and we have to do our own homework, and then also welcome and invite and seek feedback. What is the impact that I'm having? Not the intent I have, but the impact that I'm having. And over time in active, we develop a muscle. We develop a new muscle, right? And it's like going to the gym. It's that muscle is going to be sore for a while, and then you're going to get stronger, and then you're going to be able to lift more. And someday, you will be able to do it without any soreness at all, because it's just second nature. This is a building phase. And we don't have this competency to deal with this year or these topics, a lot of us. So there's a lot of grace we need to give ourselves as we get it imperfect, to be gracious and forgiveness in ourselves, and also forgiveness of others, and helping others in their learning journey, which is really important. We may be really tired and we may not want to do that. However, there's a really amazing opening right now to cracking through. And if we can just hang in there and hold space for each other, I think we could create something new and unprecedented together. And so, like I said, through active phase 3 to phase 4 advocate, which is I'm fearless, I'm strong, I'm consistent, I am a pain in the butt, I'm a squeaky wheel, I am relentless. I am asking hard questions. I'm asking, like, why do we do this? Why is it this way? How did this happen? How do we prevent it from not happening again? I'm a super duper champion, and I don't wait for permission. And so advocate level to me feels like a real aspirational phase, but it's the stretch, it's the person we all wish we had in our corner. And it's the leader that we all wish we had worked for and with. And it's the companies we wish would use their voice in the world to be strong phase 4 advocates for civil rights, for social justice issues. We see brands really struggling to do this well and with credibility and authenticity. And some are more ready to do that than others. But this is, I think, what particularly younger generations, they want to see the company they work for be really good at this stuff, and that's going to be interesting to play catch up around. So let me pause. Eduardo, what do we have in chat? Anything to discuss?
So, yeah, I think so. So I want to share, because Dave just shared something in the chat, and I think we can move away from the presentation. Perhaps we have about 10 more minutes. So
yeah, for sure. Yep, let's do that.
So
absolutely.
Dave said, but saying welcome to the party kind of seems dismissive to me. Maybe that's a triggering response on my part, but that kind of came off as a tough shit mentality. He said, yes, don't apologize. Part of this is me just talking aloud, but hey, then again, we blind folks see the future. So why not? And he said, tone of voice, though, is not talked about enough too much either. Yeah, so wanting to name that. So thank you, Dave, for adding that and
appreciate that.
Having that there. Yeah.
That was great. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the welcome to the party, you're late thing, we have to acknowledge that there's a lot of people who feel that way. It's like this racism is not 2020, it's been happening. And so I just want to acknowledge and give name to that. I mean, I feel it's been frustrating, honestly, to be in this field and want this conversation to be important to people and have it be dismissed for so many years. And Dave, I know it, I'm sure this is what you feel too. And so some of us can be like, oh, now it's a topic of conversation. Like, this is not new. And I think there's frustration, there's anger, there's resentment that is around. And I just want to name that. But the point is, when you encounter that in others, to not be fragile. How many of you have read White Fragility? So white fragility centers our white feelings around being sort of shocked that this is true, horrified by what we're learning. And then it may be met with frustration on the other side. And I think that it's worthy. So what's important is fragility, noticing our emotions, noticing when we are sort of unintentionally burdening somebody with our reaction to what we're learning this year and not making it about us. So I don't know, Dave, if that's fair, but I did just want to get a little deeper and define the what I thought about, like the source of the anger and the frustration is so real, and that's what is our job, to listen to that and to learn as quickly as we possibly can if we haven't been paying attention.
I also want to acknowledge that Robin just said, when I feel sensitive about words like that, I have to ask myself the why am I being triggered, right? Which I think is like a great, because I think it's very quick to ouch. I feel like they're very like, like, wah! And I feel like it's every 20 seconds, I'm like,
it is.
Specifically as we are nearing the election, right? I just feel like every 20 seconds, it's like my nervous system is on fire. And I think thank you for sharing that, Robin, because I feel like one of the things, and I want to and this comes from a certain space of privilege, I want to acknowledge too, is that the feeling of lack of safety, right? And I think there are ways in which the last election heightened my lack of safety in ways in which I kind of felt like in the various identities that I have was like swimming in okay water. Like, I was like, but I feel like the water went up, like boiling really fast. And I was like, I don't know where I'm at, right? And I think what's been so difficult is that I haven't been able to anchor myself in anything, right? I just feel like like the triggers are like nonstop, and I don't know if that's something that other people can relate to, but I just feel like there's this way in which I can't find myself. I can't ground and center because I feel like I'm constantly being knocked off by the shit show that's happening right now. And I think I also want to name that too, because of the conversation around diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? Because that's something that's also very fragile right now, right? With the Trump administration, right? So the various ways that people are on the front line of this work, right, are now, like, talk about whiplash, forced to switch at the drop of a hat, to show up in service. And I wonder if you can speak to that, in our remaining minutes. Like, what do you feel like is emerging? What's on the front line? How are people responding to the current climate?
Yeah, well, that executive order that you're talking about, Eduardo, came down a couple weeks ago, and then the shockwaves of literally, basically, we can't teach anti-racism in federal contractors and federal agencies. So this is hundreds of thousands of people that were going through really good training, really solid stuff being delivered by a lot of the people that I know, and it was a cease and desist. So cancellations of contracts have been happening. And it said that talking about these things is unpatriotic. So it was a pretty heavy thing to process for all of us, because I feel like just this year, we were able to finally name a lot of things and finally talk about things in the workplace that we had been massaging or avoiding in a way. Like, I think that we've never really been able to say racism at work. We've never been able to say white. I've been told to take white out of my PowerPoints before. So now we can't talk about white supremacy culture, which is a really fascinating lens through which to see a lot of these things. Again, lots could change in a couple weeks. However, yes. I do think it's the right teaching. It's finally getting to the heart of the issue, which is that our cultures have been built by and for and around white norms. And that's sort of fundamentally at the core of what we need to address. And then we need to understand those norms. I mean, it just was so important in the historical perspective, all of it. So Are we going to figure out ways around still teaching this? Of course. That's, I think the feeling in the field is, but if we continue teaching in the same way, though, we do risk the wrath and we risk punishment. And I don't know where that ends. And I don't know how that's going to be consequenced, but there's other really good teaching you can do on this topic. Like the business case is really important to talk about, even if you just get leaders for a half an hour and you can explain that this is a talent attraction and retention vehicle. It's a customer attraction and retention vehicle. Keeping the best and brightest and making everybody comfortable so they can be creative is, I think that appeals to a lot of people and is still a way to speak about the value of diverse teams and talent. But it's tricky. Everybody's responding to that in a different way, Eduardo. I think it depends how risk comfortable you are as a firm, and also how many government agencies you work with. I mean, we mainly work with large publicly held companies, so that aren't contractors. So it hasn't really, we've been able to continue to teach, but it's still very much on our radar screen and very careful.
Jennifer, and I know we're winding down. I feel like we could keep talking. But where I was left in what you said was an acknowledging that these seats of power are primarily held by white, straight, cisgender men, right? That the argument ultimately ends up being about bottom line, right? Like the reductionist.
I know, I hate it.
Like
I hate it.
The way to convince you to sit in this conversation is that it's about the dollars. And it leaves me with such a bad aftertaste in my mouth, and I feel like it's like the evolution for the rise of the feminine. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And the way in which patriarchal centering is around that context. It's about money extraction, and that I think that there is the opportunity, and I think to allow something new to emerge where we do this work because it is the work that there is for us to do, not because I have to convince you that it's going to impact your pocketbook at the end of
and what's in it for me, right? I mean, that's been, I mean, and unfortunately we've met with so much resistance you're right, Eduardo. Like every time I have to make those points, it breaks my heart, because I shouldn't have to give you more data about my humanity. I shouldn't have to prove over and over again that I matter, or that I deserve to be comfortable and psychologically safe when I'm doing work, and I do feel, I hate it. But I also know I have to meet learners where they're at.
Totally.
In order to bring people forward, and everyone's going to resonate with this argument in a different way. And that's just kind of where we are. But I'm glad you said that, because in this community, we can say that, that it's.
I keep going back to Robin saying it's like code switching all day long. It's like
all day long. Right.
It's like the switch dance. Yeah.
Dun, 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 dun. Look over here, shiny object.
Code bridge. So thank you all so much for joining us for this conversation. Jennifer, how can people be in touch with you? We're going to be following up with an email with her contact information for those of you who don't know Jennifer Brown. But there's so many things that you're doing. Like you have weekly calls. Your community is so engaged and supportive and empowered. I love being a part of that community. I've had the privilege of hosting when Jennifer Brown was in absentia, holding space and being Jennifer Brown. I got to play Jennifer Brown, which is super yummy.
I loved that. I was so honored.
So how do people follow you, Jennifer?
So I'll put my community call RSVP in the chat for everybody. If you'd like to join us, it is Thursdays at noon Eastern. We just had one today on mental health. We brought in some experts to talk about mental health first aid, which is actually a program accessible to anyone, and it treats mental health just like you would first aid, right? It's health, period. And so I learned so much just from today. So please join us. And once you RSVP once, you'll always be on the calls if you'd like. And then I have 2 books. That inclusive leader model comes from, I'm going to do a little demo.
I get to be Vanna
How
White.
to be.
I get to show my Jennifer Brown.
my gosh, they match you as well. They're
And I
right
love
on
that
brand.
I got to be a reader on the second one, which was really
Very
luscious
true.
and really grateful.
Very
for that.
true.
Yes.
That's right. That's right. And then I have a podcast called The Will to Change. So please also check that out. I have amazing guests. And yeah, I mean, thank you all for coming today and for the work you're doing and will do, and the ways you are comfortable being uncomfortable, pushing yourselves, activating all parts of who you are, and also doing the self-care that we need to do as we continue to kind of create change. So
Beautiful.
thank you, everybody.
Elevated sparkleish.
Thank you.
I know we are a couple minutes over. I wanted to share that next week our speaker is Dr. Maisa Akbar. She's a Latinx, Afro-Latinx woman expert on urban trauma. And she just wrote a book called Beyond Ally. She's an unbelievable story, and really excited to have her specifically talking through the lens of racial justice and equity. And then on the Thursday after the election, we're holding Sacred Space. So we don't know what's going to happen in the world or in the planet, but we are going to gather the way we always gather and just be together. And it may be songs of mourning, it may be songs of joy, it may be celebration, it may be all of it. Like, who knows what will greet us after that. And I just love that our non-American family is present with us in spirit.
Thank you.
They're like, thank you so much. They're also fingers crossed, in alignment. We see you. Thank you. And then if you're able to stay on, there is a final little thing that we do. Again, we know that we're over time, so this is like a bonus, an addendum. So if you have to run, we totally get it. And we so thank you so much for being here. And for those of us, so if you have to go, of course you have to go. And then we're going to let that settle. And then we have a little thing to kind of complete our circle together. And Bernadette's already ready. Bernadette's ready to go. Yeah. And I want to acknowledge in this that that Dave, right? What we do in this is we hold our hands up and we say, we see you and we thank you. And I get that in saying that, we are obviously acknowledging the privilege of sight, right?
You're fine. Don't worry about it.
And
Shit.
yeah, and I just want to name that. And if there's any way to acknowledge that we have given attention to someone, that way we move from the next person. So if you are not on the call and not active, then we're going to invite you to go. We're going to actually move you out of the room. And if you are here, we're going to invite you to do the thumbs up sign. I know some people are on mute, so on the monitor, so that we know that you're in the room. Okay, and everybody else, as you're able, we're going to invite you to raise your hand. And it's a little ritual that we do here to close. Right? And I'm going to start with you, Dave, and I'm going to say, I see you, I hear you, I feel you, and I thank you. And you get to choose somebody else that you get to acknowledge.
Oh, there we go. Sorry, I hit the mute button. Everybody keeps leaving. I'll just pass. Let me just sort of focus on this one.
Sure.
Great. So Bernadette, I see you, I hear you, I feel you, and I thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. I see you, I feel you, I thank you twice for today. And I'm here and I hear you too.
Oh, thank you, Bernadette. Let's see. Deborah, I hear you, I feel you, I see you, I acknowledge you, I value you. Thank you.
Laura, I see you, I feel you, I thank you for being here, I appreciate you.
Ben, I see you, I hear you, I feel you, I thank you, I like your artwork on the wall.
Well, thank you. Diana, I see you, I feel you, I hear you, and I thank you for being here.
Great.
Am I the last?
I think you're the last, Diana.
So.
Okay. Everybody, I see you, I hear you, I thank you, and I really appreciate being part of this community.
Yeah.
Diana, we are grateful for you too. Elevated Sparkalation. We will see you next week for our next conversation, and then hopefully the week after in a space of celebration. Jennifer, if you can just hold on
Yes.
for
Yes.
one